So hey anime fans, the series name is What If Naruto Got Harem with Steven Universe, so let's start the series. The torrents that the gloomy clouds had been containing were released. Rain poured down on the two figures at the bottom of the crater. The first person had a slender, wiry physique, black hair that fell down his shoulders, and a sword strapped to the back of his waist. He cried out, panting, "Are you done yet, Dobe?" Even when his body trembled with fatigue, he didn't let it stop. He looked at his opponent and noticed that he was also worn out. "Not yet, team," shot back the other guy. Even though he was exhausted, he resisted the urge to give up before his opponent did. The second person had 3 whisker markings on each cheek and spiky blonde hair. The blonde man yelled in frustration, "Let's settle once and for all, team." "Yes, let's," said the other man. After shouting, "Goodbye, my one and only friend," they rushed to one another in a sudden rush of energy. While a sphere of chakra materialized in the hand of the man with the blonde hair, lightning burst into being and engulfed the dark-haired one. The sky darkened and blazed with lightning as they approached each other, yet there was no rain. Instead, nature was motionless and eagerly awaiting the outcome of the Titans' battle. Yin and Yang, good and evil, light and dark, Naruto and Sasuke, and Rasengan and Chidori are examples of two forces at odds. The ground shook as the two strikes collided head-on and burst into a dazzling display of color. The black-haired man was shown standing over the blonde man's lifeless body as the illumination faded. Before passing out, the black-haired man murmured, "I'm sorry that it had to be this way, maybe in another life we could have been better than this. Please forgive me, brother." In limbo, the blonde man seemed to ask himself, "Why Kurama? Why do they still hate me after all I've done and sacrificed for them?" He had just finished witnessing the celebration of his death by his community and alleged friends. The voice screamed from inside his skull, "I don't know, Kit. But listen up, I've found a new world that we can go to, a place that has no chakra, no Jinchuruki, and no ninja. The closest thing that world has to ninja are people called gems. You will automatically get turned into one of these gems, but there is a downside," Kurama said. "What is it, Kurama?" inquired the blonde man. "I die," Kurama said with a stern voice. "The energy required to do the transformation and keep you and your chakra network intact will drain me and turn me into your gem. But don't worry, I still found a way to help you. I will become your shape-shifting sentient weapon to help you. Plus you'd be lost without me." The blonde man said, "But how will I be able to access your yokai?" "Simple, you can tap into my yokai by using the weapon, plus I also managed to give you the Rinna Sharingan, but it is only in one eye, so it and its techniques will be a bit weaker, but nothing a lot of hard work can't fix," the fox said. "Our time is up in this plane, Kit, so we have to get moving." 20,000 years after Naruto's death, the kindergarten. Naruto took a seat in the underground labyrinth that had been created to keep him contained. In addition to being 7 feet 2 inches and wearing a black hooded Akatsuki-styled cloak with the kanji for Bad Fox written in red on the back, he had undergone significant physical changes since his death. His eyes, which were once sea blue and exuded warmth and comfort, had become lifeless and dull, and his hair had covered the other eye. They had attempted to clone him but had given up since Kurama had ensured that no stable clones could be created. He had woken up in the maze and realized that he was here because he couldn't be reprogrammed by the home planet jewels. To conceal the crimson gem that was now his hand, Naruto had wrapped his right arm in bandages. Naruto had learned that the gem would spread more widely the more he controlled Kurama's yokai. He had fully mastered all 9 tails of chakra and yokai, as shown by the fact that it now encompassed his arm. Additionally, he had mastered the Sharingan and was able to use it to the same extent as Old Man's 6 routes, though he had to hide it because it slightly depleted his chakra. He had practiced his Nin, Tai, Gen, Ken, and Kin jutsus for 4,000 years apiece. The next 500 years were spent honing his gem skills, and the final 500 years were spent combining and perfecting both his gem and ninja abilities. During this period, he also absorbed knowledge about the world and gem world. A human voice calling for assistance was the sound he had not heard in a long time, and just as he was about to call it a day, he felt the first sensation of fresh air. Steven's POV. Steven Quart's universe was having a rough day. The gems had gone on a mission without him, and when he attempted to follow them, the warp pad led him here. Now, he was frantically attempting to escape these weird monsters while phoning for assistance in the hopes that someone would come to his aid. After that, he discovered the odd panel that led to a maze that he knew would be confusing. He realized that this was the end when he heard a roar behind him. And now I'll never see Garnet, Amethyst, Dad, or Pearl again. Guess this is the end of me. Steven closed his eyes and bid farewell. The point of view of Naruto. Naruto was about to celebrate his freedom after emerging from the maze. He was about to leave when he thought of the human who had called for help. Using chakra, he had located the little boy, who was about 5 feet 0 inches and wearing a pink shirt with a yellow star in the middle, blue pants, and sandals. However, what really caught Naruto's attention was the energy that flowed through the boy, which was half gem and half human. This, along with the horde of unstable gem Naruto clones, was determined to tear the young boy in front of them. With a fast thought, Naruto leaped into the air and, being cautious not to strike the boy, unleashed a shower of kunais onto the crowd below. After passing through a series of hand seals, he landed and yelled out. He exclaimed, lightning style, electromagnetic murder, as he released a burst of white lightning from his hand. The lightning soared into the sky, multiplied, and then rained down on the clones, electrocuting them since they were drawn to the metal kunais. Before they touched the ground, they were already dead. Then Naruto approached the boy, whose eyes were now wide open in wonder. Naruto was about to explain what the boy had seen, but decided against it because the boy was practically a gem. However, before he could say anything, the boy began to ask him questions, which Naruto ignored and quickly instructed the boy not to tell anyone about him. At that point, Naruto was ready to depart after sensing 3 gem lifeforms approaching him at a breakneck speed. He hastily resealed his kunais, glanced at Steven, and then told him, "If you ever need help, just say my name 3 times and I will be there. This is to repay the debt of you freeing me." The boy said, "Wait, what's your name?" After saying, "My name is Susanoo," Naruto disappeared in a rush of wind. When Steven saw the pearl's expression, he realized he was in serious trouble. He could only brace himself for the verbal abuse he was about to endure because he knew she was angry. No matter how much he tried and pleaded with the gems to train him, they always refused, stating that it was too dangerous and that he needed to awaken and have decent control over his gem powers, which, based on his nearly zero access to them, was a long way off, probably in his 20s if he is lucky. He always hated it when the gems were upset with him for doing things like this because it reminded him of how weak and untrained he was, and how much of a weakness he was to them. Before Pearl hugged him and led him to the warp pad that carried them home in a beam of light, Steven was so engrossed in his thoughts that he totally ignored anything she said. Amethyst and Garnet exchanged glances before Amethyst spoke. She asked, "She left us here, right?" Garnet's response was, "Yep." Wanna check this place out? The box-haired gem responded, yep. 12 midnight time skip tonight. Even at midnight, Stephen couldn't stop thinking about how strong Susanoo was and how easily he was able to get rid of those gem thingies. Perhaps if he asked Susanoo to train him, the gems would realize that he was a crystal gem, and he could then tell them about Susanoo, making them a really cool gem fighting family and team. Yes, and I own Naruto, Bleach, and Attack on Titans. Stephen thought enthusiastically, that's it, I'm going to ask him to train me and then I'm going to be the best crystal gem ever, before he finally fell asleep. With Naruto, Kurama and Naruto had made the decision to live in Beach City. Because he needed to watch after the youngster and it reminded him of Toad Mountain, where he trained with the toads. Please email me the name if you know. Naruto enjoyed the stillness there. He therefore made the decision to hold off on entering the town until daylight. Good morning. The reason Naruto slept on an upside-down tree branch was because Kurama had challenged him to do so, and when he woke up, he was sore all over. The blonde said, "Oi Kurama, could you please do me a favor?" When the fox asked, "What is it, Kit?" Naruto screamed in his head, "Remind me never to do any one of your dares again." The fox answered, "Deal, Kit." Following their agreement, Naruto started using genjutsu to transform his appearance as he traveled to Beach City. His waist-length, spiky, drab blonde hair vanished, and in its place was red mop-like hair. Imagine Nagato's body and hair. Naruto, or Nagato as he was now known, entered the town, went to the mayor's office, bought the lighthouse, quickly removed Ronaldo from it, and then used the wood style to create furniture. Having finished, he made the decision to go for a walk. Because no one was pointing a nasty gaze or harsh whisper at him, and because everyone was pleasant to everyone, including him, he was thoroughly enjoying the walk. And he was only now here. Smirking, Naruto realized that he wouldn't trade this area for anything at the moment. He was going to carry on thinking when he sensed the chakra pulse emanating from the seal he had applied to Stephen. The boy must be in trouble because the seal only becomes active when the name Susanoo is said 3 times. While putting on his Susanoo gear, Naruto calmly entered an alley before running off at high jonin speeds. He was wearing the hooded cloak from his time in the cell, and he had a bank porcelain mask on to cover his face, leaving the right half blank to conceal the Rinne Sharingan. 8 spider-like appendages, think Nagato's own, protruded from his back, and his hair was now silver with 2 horn-like protruding from his head. Kurama, on the other hand, transformed into a claymore and affixed himself to Naruto's back. Naruto grinned as the dynamic duo made their way to Stephen's signature, which was unexpectedly submerged. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for to demonstrate one of his new jutsus. With Stephen. At the moment, Stephen and Connie were rolling the pink energy bubble he had created, which served as their prison, away from the enormous gem worm that was attempting to devour them. As Connie stared at Stephen as if he were insane, Stephen had called for Susanoo. They both turned around when they realized they were trapped between the worm and a rock wall. The worm was on the verge of swallowing the bubble when the water started to bubble and churn, creating a whirlpool with lightning at its center. The worm was sucked into the whirlpool, where it was repeatedly electrocuted before losing consciousness. When the vortex finally subsided, Susanoo was visible standing, or perhaps floating, depending on your perspective, in all his magnificent splendor. Before asking in a tremulous voice, Stephen observed as the stranger swam over. He stumbled, "SS. Is that you?" he inquired. With a monotonous voice, the creature replied to Susanoo, "Yes it is, boy." Without noticing the worm swimming after them, he lifted the bubble and swam to the surface, saying, "Now boy, let's get you out of here." Despite Susanu's increased strength and speed, Stephen and Connie could only watch in wonder as he carried their bubble to the water's surface, which was at least 30 minutes above the ocean floor. Despite this, Susanu didn't appear to need air or have any equipment that provided it. Connie was having a hard time understanding it, and it was making her insane since she was unable to think of a plausible explanation for this event. Susanu rolled them to the shore when they got to the ocean's surface, and they tried to think of a way to burst the bubble. After a few minutes, Susanu chose to share his approach. "Hey, why don't I just use Kurama and pop the stupid thing?" Together, Stephen and Connie questioned, "Who's Kurama?" Before responding, Susanu palmed her face in response to the query. Susanu replied, "Kurama is the sword on my back." Then he took Kurama out of his claymore shape. Connie remarked, "No offense." Susanu said, "Susanu, girl. Well, no offense Susanu, but nothing has been able to pop this infernal bubble. What makes you think that a sword of all things would be able to pop this bubble?" Connie responded, "Kid, I strongly suggest that we leave the girl in the bubble, push it back in the ocean and go home." The huge fox said, Now Kurama, what kind of person would I be if I left her there like that? First we leave her with some two-player board games and then we leave her at the bottom of the ocean." The shinobi with silver hair replied. He turned to face Connie now and spoke. Before just poking the bubble with Kurama, he added, "You hurt Kurama's feelings and for that you get to see Kurama's power firsthand. Now I strongly suggest that you two get out of here in 3, 2, 1, and 0. As though listening to the countdown, the enormous worm sprang from the ocean and struck Susanu's location with its head. When it raised its head, Susanu was gone. "No. He can't be gone, he just can't," exclaimed Stephen, his eyes filling with tears of frustration. With an idea developing in his mind, he grabbed Connie's hand and began rushing for the support beams that held up the boardwalks. "How can he be gone? He was supposed to help me get strong. Well, I just can't let his sacrifice be in vain," he thought. "Connie," Stephen stated in a desperate tone, "I have a plan, so do exactly as I say." Connie discovered that it was difficult to talk and run for your life, so she could only nod. Following Stephen's explanation of his strategy, they parted ways and let the enormous worm to entangle itself in the boardwalk's supporting beams. They were just about able to leave the area before the worm collapsed the boardwalk on itself. Before Stephen could say anything, Connie and Stephen stopped running and started laughing tensely at their tight escape. Well, that could have been a lot worse. The worm exploded from the debris as soon as he said those words, followed by a massive roar that rocked Beach City and warned 3 of the beasts. Before it began to choke and a very familiar voice could be heard screaming from the worm's throat, the worm prepared to attack the 2 small humans below it who had dared to hurt it. "Let me out. Now," before our beloved shinobi with silver or blonde hair exploded out of the worm's jaws. The 2 kids cried out, "Susanu, you're alive," and hurried to give him a hug. The shinobi sighed and remarked, "Kurama, add 1 mark to the eaten by something tally, which makes it 34,459 times. The enormous fox answered, "Now that we've had our hug out, I suggest you run and let me deal with this overgrown sausage." Susanu responded. Stephen shouted, "Hey Susanu, its weak spot is at its forehead, because that's where the gem is," as he dashed forward, pulling Connie along with him, in an attempt to locate the gem so that he could present Susanu to them once they had dealt with the worm. With Susanu and Naruto. To the worm's amazement, Susanu exclaimed, "Now then, with a sly smile that neither the worm nor anybody else would notice. "Let's get wild," Susanoo exclaimed before disappearing in a sudden burst of speed. A second later, he reappeared near the worm's tail with Kurama drawn. He quickly hacked off the tail before applying yokai to the wound to prevent the worm from healing. Before Kurama spoke up, Susanoo mocked, Now Wormy-chan, didn't your mother tell you not to play with sharp objects? You could hurt yourself." He then disappeared once again before resurfacing in front of the worm and saying, the shinobi's sole response before being flung across the dunes and landing hard among the wooden debris that was in the shinobi's general area was, "You worry too much, Kurama." Watching the worm howl in its purported victory and behind him, Susanoo got to his feet. As Susanoo was ready to charge into battle, he felt a trail of liquid run down his face. Kurama recognized it instantly and attempted to talk Susanoo out of looking, but it was all in vain because Susanoo had already touched the sticky black liquid and brought it to the mask's mouth, where a thin line appeared before becoming a mouth. Then, as if to verify that it was, in fact, his blood, Susanoo stretched out his tongue and tasted the liquid. When his tongue detected the copper-tasting liquid, chaos ensued. "This blood, it's mine, my blood," was all Susanoo could utter before his pupil appeared to contract. As Kurama hurried forward to put an end to the wretched thing that had dared to hurt him, all he could say was, "Oh shit," as Susanoo disappeared in a flash of speed, leaving a burning crater in the earth. In a flash, Susanoo rushed up the worm's head and punched it into the earth. It moved so quickly that the worm didn't realize who was attacking it until its head was buried in the sand, at which point it was launched into the air before it could comprehend the situation. With Kurama in his claymore form, Susanoo leaped into the air after the worm. When they were level, Kurama started to glow a deep red that bordered black, and then Susanoo yelled. As the worm was about to aim its head at the sand to drill its escape route, a large cut appeared at its side, followed by numerous cuts that littered its body varying in size and depth. "Uzumaki sword art, continuous slash," he said, and then he disappeared. The worm was relieved to no longer be able to see the creature that had caused it so much pain. Fear was evident in the worm's eyes as it searched for its assailant. It was so focused on its quest that it failed to notice the sand shifting and solidifying into spikes, which the worm landed on. With a faint hope that it would be able to escape the silver-haired devil that was pursuing it, the battered and bleeding creature slowly slithered away from the crater it had made with its body. However, just as it was about to touch the water, the devil forcibly dragged it back. The worm then changed back into its original form, blinding Susanoo with a flash of light. As the light faded, the worm was replaced by a woman, who was about 6 feet 8 inches with light blue hair, a busty figure, plump and storm blue eyes without pupils. She was flawless, except for the wounds all over her body. With a voice scratchy from years of neglect, I mean years, she pleaded, "Please spare me." She rasped out, weak from the one-sided murder. Susanoo answered in an emotionless voice, "Let me think." He thought, for a while before responding, "No." He swiftly took down Kurama but paused as another thought occurred to him. His voice was forceful but hardly more than a whisper, "Look at me." The jewel was forced to face him, her eyes glimmering with hope that he would spare her life. However, this was not to be, as Susanoo's mask's right half started to change to create an eye hole, and the final sound she heard before going dark was the phrase, "Tsukuyami." A moment later, she woke up nailed to a cross in a desert. Susanoo emerged and spoke as she fought to get off the cross. He disappeared after adding, "Welcome to hell, here I am God, and this will be your torture for the next 3 days." Gaara appeared in his place, grinning savagely, and then he raised his hand and said, "Sand style, sand coffin," as the sand began to cover her from head to toe. Before Gaara said the following 5 words that would drive her into a new level of misery, the gem made a vain attempt to break free from the sand, as the sand continued to crawl up her body until it eventually wrapped her in a sand cocoon. The teenage girl with the red hair shouted, "Sand style, slow sand funeral," and then gave the sand instructions to crush every portion of her body slowly and arbitrarily. Her agonized cries soon filled the air, but no one could hear them because of the privacy seal Susanoo had put in place when he first got to the beach. He also decided to use genjutsu on the 3 gems that he knew would have interfered with his fun. The 3 of them were standing in one place, believing that they were already battling whatever gem had attacked the beach, but Susanoo was too preoccupied to notice that Tsukimi had finished, leaving a very brain-dead gem behind. Actually, he didn't realize until he felt a sharp pain in his right hand. He looked down to see that the female gem had bitten it, but what shocked him was how quickly she was able to draw blood from him by biting through the gem as if it were normal skin. She cut her own arm and pressed her hand against his, causing pain to flood Susanoo's arm as her blood met his and flowed into his body. Before slamming his palm into her head and splattering blood and gore into the air, Susanoo grimaced in agony. He then withdrew his hand, chuckled darkly, and crushed her gem in his hand, breaking it into pieces. After cleaning up the mess with clones, he vanished in a blast of lightning. With Connie and Steven. Steven had just finishing off his explanation of who he and the gems were, how he met Susanoo, and his intention to ask her to train him. To his astonishment and happiness, Connie was awestruck by his life and wanted to share in it. As a result, she begged Steven to call Susanoo and ask if he could train them both. Steven granted her request and made the call. The silver-haired shinobi asked, "So what do you brats want? As far as I can tell, none of you are in any danger nor are you dying, so why did you summon me?" The 2 of them perspired at the antics of the older person in the rooms, as well as the fact that he was a chibi version of himself. He then realized this and dispelled it, muttering something about a fox and jam. Suddenly, Susanoo appeared in a breath of wind, slowly materializing before their very eyes, before yelling, "Tada! Behold miserable mortals, the great and powerful Susanoo." In a worried tone, the half-gem stated, "Well," Steven began, "I was wondering if you could train me and my friend Connie so that I could start going on missions with the gems and Connie could come on missions with me." After giving this some thought, Susanoo asked his buddy, "So Kurama, should we train them?" Maybe, though the boy would only get so far in the training due to the fact that he believes honor exists in the battlefield. But the girl has a chance since I sense darkness in her that we can use to mold her into a model warrior. The fox said simply. Before he saw her for the first time, Susanoo could only think about what Kurama had said. She was about 4 feet 4 inches, I'm not sure how tall a typical 12-year-old is, please include the height in the review, with chocolate brown hair that reached her waist. She was wearing a blue dress that was well past her knees and red Wellingtons that were worn out from all the running, but what really caught his attention were her eyes, which were black but lacked the luster that accompanied them and instead were dull with the loneliness that accompanied abandonment. Susanoo gave her a curious look and then nodded. He disappeared in a gust of wind after saying, "Sure, but I will need a few months in order to prepare your training schedule. When 9 months are over, call me." Using the gems. Over a pool of lava, Garnet was found meditating and thinking about the mystery that had occurred. One moment, she and the gems were fighting a worm-like gem, and the next, the creature was gone, leaving behind a destroyed beach. However, What really worried Garnet was the body. It was obviously female and, based on the appearance of the body, she was a gem, but what really frightened her was the look in her dead eyes, which was that of a broken mind. Garnet and the others then went in search of her gem, only to discover fragments of it scattered across the beach. She was in a clearing in the woods on a secluded island, a few hundred miles from Beach City, when her gem began to glow softly. Her pupils then dilated, and she found herself in the throes of a vision. She looked up at the sky and saw the sun and moon moving faster and slower until they stopped. If her math was right, 9 months had passed. As she was about to exit the vision, 4 figures suddenly materialized in her midst. The first was obviously a gem, judging by the arm. The female figure's gem was a little strange because she could sense 2 distinct energy signatures emanating from it, but she assumed it was a fusion. The next figure was also female, but this was all she could see because it was shadowy. The final 2 were the ones that made her breath catch in her throat. The first was Stephen, as she could tell by the warm glow emanating from his gem, and the second was a male gem. "Wait, a male gem," she exclaimed in her mind. His right arm, the 8 spider arms on his back, and the 2 4-inch horns on his head were the only distinguishing features she could see. It was radiating pure power, like the girl, but stronger, but before she could get a better look at the future, she was startled out of it by Stephen's upbeat voice. Before coming up with a strategy to defeat this new menace, Garnet got up and stretched. They had 9 months, and they were going to use it. As more of his red crystallized arm fell away, revealing smooth skin in its place, Naruto gritted his teeth in agony. This had been happening for a month, and he suspected that the strange blood transfusion that had taken place at the hands of the first gem he had fought was the cause. Kurama's incessant babble hadn't really helped either. The fox kept muttering something about children. Although he was quite happy that he could feel with his right hand, the drawbacks of the circumstance exceeded the benefits. The gentle clattering, like moving glass, coming from the lighthouse's living room interrupted Naruto's stream of thought. He drew a kunai and held it in a reverse hold, ready to cut at the intruder. He brought the kunai down on the intruder after leaping from around the corner at Chunin level speed, but he stopped when he heard the words. "Daddy, is that you?" inquired the invader. Oh no! The intruder, who had somehow gotten past Naruto's defenses, was crouching with a kunai in his palm, only inches from his eye. His mind recognized her words as he grasped his kunai. "Wait, what did you call me?" he said, his grip tightening till the metal cracked. "How dare someone abandon a lady like this?" "Calm down, Naruto, at least think this through." A tiny whine interrupted his thoughts, and as he turned around, he saw the girl shivering from the cold the night wind had brought in and the little ki that was dripping from his body. Before stopping his ki, he decided to take her to one of the lighthouse's spare rooms when his fatherly instincts took over and he unzipped his cloak and wrapped it over her nude body. He chose to examine her as he laid her in bed in the hopes of locating her parents. What he saw was startling. She had his ocean blue and red eyes, which resembled the Sharingan without its books, and she had his whisker marks. However, the most startling feature was the seal that appeared on her stomach. He created a sealless clone of the seal and had it display his seal. It was nearly identical, but hers was designed to hold something other than the 6 tails. One more thing he needed to do. He would finally have a family. No offense to Kurama, a 200-foot fox wouldn't fit at the family reunion. Someone to teach him how to throw a kunai the way Iruka-sensei taught him, someone to teach him his own fighting style and jutsus, and more. The possibility that she would be his daughter was too great for him to ignore. As he braced himself for the potential disappointment he may encounter, he thought to himself, "Whoa Naruto, calm down, you still have to check, can't be too careful, just one more test. When he took a kunai out of the pouch fastened to his ankle, the girl who had been quiet since Naruto had unintentionally let go of his kai spoke up, her voice tinged with fear. She said, "Daddy, what are you doing?" He raised his mismatched eyes to meet hers, met her eyes directly, and spoke as warmly as he could manage, which wasn't much. "Don't worry, Daddy just wants to take a little blood to test something, see?" With that, he pricked his finger and swiped the blood on a scroll, causing it to burst open and reveal an orange and black hoodie. It was an expensive piece of art with pockets sewn inside and numerous storage scrolls positioned both inside and outside. It also had a growth and repair seal on it, allowing it to grow with its owner. On his 12th birthday, Sarutobijiji gifted it to him, but he had never had a chance to try it on. He was abruptly awakened from his reverie when he heard the girl gasp in amazement and turned to see her staring at the hoodie. She cried, "It's beautiful," with little control over her joy. Before removing the cloak that was keeping her warm and putting the hoodie on her, Naruto glanced at her and then studied the garment before zipping it up for her. She let out an excited squeal and asked him the question she was unable to ask. His words, "Yeah, it's yours now," were followed by a grin that reminded him of a fox plastered on her face. Naruto's heart skipped a beat. Damn his laws, he was going to keep her whether she was his daughter or not. He returned his attention to her. He poked the tip of her finger with the kunai and then rubbed her wounded finger over another scroll that he had the clone pull out, saying, "Now hold still, I need to take a little blood to check something." The scroll exploded in a cloud of smoke as her blood stain was finished, and as the smoke cleared, she saw two objects, a smiling Naruto and a pair of orange and black pants that he had thrown to her. She caught the flying garments and gazed at them in confusion. Naruto scowled at his own folly, he hadn't mentioned or shown her anything regarding attire. After a while of restraint and attempting to persuade her that the clone wasn't a face thief, as she referred to it, who was determined to replace her, he had the clone henge placed inside her and demonstrated how to put the pants on. After she put them on, Naruto finally got a good look at her. She was around 5 feet 2 inches and looked like his 14-year-old Naruto form, save for the red streaks in her hair and her mismatched eyes, which he noticed when he looked closely at her Sharingan and noticed that 2 tomes were now idly revolving around her pupil. He reflected, yeah, must have been the excitement and fear of today's activities. "All right, kid, it's time to sleep." "Where will Daddy sleep, though?" she asked, tilting her head in a curious way that Naruto thought was cute, but he didn't have an answer because he wasn't very good at using wood style, and the only really useful things he could do with it were make wooden tools and the nativity of trees jutsu because they required a lot of chakra. So he did the only sensible thing he could do, which was to look at Yumi, as he had chosen to call her, and throw a blanket at her before speaking. "Go over, Scooch. We will need to share." Yumi's expression of unadulterated joy was enough to convince him that he had taken the correct decision. After tucking her into bed, he lay next her and gave her a hug. She was supporting him. Author style, no jutsu, no time skip. After 5 hours, Yumi's shivering woke Naruto up. He sat up and rubbed his eyes, then looked around the room to see what was causing her to shiver. He discovered that the window was broken, with glass fragments scattered all over the floor. Naruto simply shrugged it off, figuring it might have been a couple of kids playing or that strange Ronaldo boy. After that, Naruto moved to deal with his new problem, keeping Yumi warm. He climbed into the bed and gave her a hug before swiftly searching through his jutsu repertoire until he found the one he was looking for. Then, using as little chakra as he could, he mumbled the name of his jutsu. Katan, Hot Hug no Jutsu. Normally, the technique would have resulted in minor burns on her outside and inside, but Kurama made him master all of his katan techniques until he could control the heat, and the effect was immediate. Yumi snuggled deeper into his arms in an attempt to get warmer. Naruto closed his eyes and smiled at this antics, and he had to speak to an old friend. He was sleeping so soundly that he was unaware of the dozen sea-green orbs that rolled around his room, grew legs, and then skittered around it before dispersing to other areas of the home. The mindscape. Naruto opened his eyes and smiled as he appeared in a familiar sewer. Over the time he and Kurama had been together, they had agreed that the sewer was the one thing that stayed, as it symbolized the beginning of their friendship. Naruto walked down the sewer, navigating through the tunnels, pipes and dead ends that made up the first part of his mental defense. Slowly the sewer gave way to a large forest that Kurama could roam through. It even came with a couple of large animals that he and Kurama would hunt on occasion to keep their skills sharp. As Naruto walked deeper into the forest, he noticed that everything was quiet, too quiet. Immediately his senses screamed at him to get down, which he did. No sooner than his body touched the ground, a light orange blur shot over his head. He quickly got up and whipped out his kunai, ready to block whatever Kurama had to throw, but he wasn't ready for what he saw next. He saw Kurama in all his two-tailed glory rolling in a field, but the shocking part was the smaller one-tailed fox that was rolling next to him. He was about to call out when Kurama stopped rolling and spoke. "Hey kid, would you mind joining us?" Before he spoke, Naruto cleared his eyes and looked for any indications of an illusion. "Hi, Kurama. The little fox next to you is who?" Kurama paused for a moment before he spoke, and the little fox, appearing quite satisfied with itself, leaped on his head as he stopped rolling. "Naruto, I want you to meet Kurama. She's my daughter. I'll be honest, I never thought of you as a father figure. Yes, a nice family friend or an irate uncle." As he sat on the grass, Naruto mocked, "But you as a dad never crossed my mind." Kurama was nested securely on his head, refusing to move no matter how hard he tried to get her off. "This is only one of the several facts about me that you humans were unable to understand." As he lay on the floor with his head resting on Naruto's lap, Kurama's deep voice rumbled, "But since I'm as forgiving as I am powerful, I forgive you for your limited view. Now get out, I need to sleep." He closed his eyes and went to sleep after saying, "It's exhausting to play with the little one, and there's something out there in the house that needs your attention." Upon hearing that there was something in the house, Naruto visibly paled and disappeared from the mindscape, leaving a sleeping Kurama and a very confused Kurama who looked around for the blonde nest that she had been resting on. Unable to find it, she climbed her father's back and turned around on it before settling down and closing her eyes, sinking into the realm of sleep. A blue eye and a purple ringed eye snapped open in alert as Naruto slowly slid his arms from around his daughter and got up from the bed. Making a single hand seal, a clone popped into existence and took his place next to Yumi while the original made his way out of the room, kunai in his right hand and his left hand tracing the wall and pouring chakra into the wall and by proxy the gem that had made the lighthouse its body and home. When he first moved in, he sensed the presence in the lighthouse, and after tracking it down, he made a deal with it. In exchange for warding off, capturing and/or killing any intruders that made their way into the house, he would feed it a constant supply of chakra, provide the raw materials required to facilitate the creation of a new body for her, and the two of them shared the lighthouse. Feeling the surge of chakra, the gem woke up and responded immediately to the intruders all around the house. With a heave and groan, The walls and floorboards writhed and detached from each other before slithering across the halls and creeping up the stairs leading to the giant light above, while some slithered down the stairs leading to the basement and training rooms underground that he had the clones dig out the first day he moved in. While all this was going on, Naruto made his way to the kitchen where he sensed the greatest disturbance among the others in the house. It was obvious that this one had to be dealt with personally and had nothing to do with the fact that cups of his precious ramen were sitting on the counter because he had been too lazy to pack them up, nothing to do with that at all. He crept into the kitchen with the kunai in hand, his eyes locked onto the figure that had emptied 20 cups of his divine ramen into a giant pot and was eating with great gusto. Tapping the wall with a chakra-coated finger, the planks on the floor raised up and wrapped around the figure, holding it in place as the lights came on, revealing the ramen eater. It was a female figure who stood at a height of 5 feet 4 inches and had pink skin of all things. She wore a plum-colored top, a pair of dark blue jeans and sneakers, and in the center of her chest was a black spade-shaped gem, and her cerise hair, which was packed in pigtails, waved around as she struggled. Her magenta eyes darted around in fright as she struggled to free her arms and feet from her wooden bindings while she kept chewing and swallowing the ramen. Laying her eyes on his figure, the trapped gem increased her struggle, her limbs thinning out and stretching towards him while she still furiously slurped the ramen from the pot. Naruto easily dodged the limbs and saw as wooden tendrils rose from the ground, enveloping the limbs in blocks of wood until the extra weight caused them to fall to the ground, while more wood encased her main body, enclosing her in a wooden coffin. "All right, I have a few questions and you're going to answer as best as you can," Naruto said. "All right?" Naruto said as he pressed a kunai on her neck with a bit of pressure, causing a trickle of blood to run down the blade and fear to appear in her eyes while her body stilled itself out of fear. Swallowing the last bit of ramen, she cleared her throat and carefully nodded, careful to make sure that the blade didn't dig deeper into her neck and cause her to poof. Seeing her nod, he took the blade away from her neck and began the interrogation. "What's your name?" She responded and teased, "Spinel, and I must say that this is a real kinky setup you got here." Her eyes never left the kunai that was in his grasp, and her bloody spills gleamed menacingly in the kitchen light, reminding everyone who was in charge. Naruto persisted in his demands for information after realizing that she was willing to comply. "Why are you here?" "We came here to ask you to join our group." Company, sincerely interested in what she had to say, he twirled the kunai in his hand and inquired. "My companions and I appeared on different planets some 12,000 years ago, and after wandering around for a few centuries, Homeworld discovered us and adopted us. Along with other gems, I spent the following 2 millennia discovering and populating other worlds. Until we were attacked on one of the worlds when we were putting up some equipment, I primarily performed as an entertainer for a high-ranking gem. I survived and lived alone on that planet for a while until a recovery crew arrived and saved me, but all the other jewels were broken. I had my first encounter with Jasper and the others there. I quickly got myself transferred to their squad after we returned." With a note of annoyance in his voice, Naruto asked, "So what does that have to do with our current situation?" The house groaned and a little shudder went through it, but he disregarded it as he concentrated on Spinel. She rolled her eyes and remarked, "I was getting there. It's called setting the mood." She uttered the words, "Geez, Killjoy," before clearing her throat and going on with her memory. "We spent the next few centuries exploring new worlds and rescuing gems in need until the rebellion took place." She paused her speech for a moment as war-related memories came flooding back, her eyes glazed over as she relived the conflict in her mind. "I and the others refused to take a side in the war and instead focused on saving as many stranded gems as we could while shattering the cracked gems and other gems that were viewed as abominations," she said. We ultimately left Homeworld and made the decision to find a planet where we could live without being influenced by Homeworld or the rebels, assisting those in need and putting an end to those who came into contact with us. But they wouldn't let us be, regardless of who we assisted or how many more jewels we broke. 20 years ago, we ran away and crashed here, and we have been hiding ever since. That is, until about 2 months ago, we saw an energy surge from this side of the earth that was unlike anything we have ever experienced. She said, her eyes staring longingly at the now empty pot of ramen, so we hauled ass over here in order to invite you to join us. And what precisely does your group do, with real interest, he inquired, and why should I join you? Well, we started off as a retrieval group before being promoted to an annihilation squad. We are now a group committed to staying neutral and making the most of the rest of our lives, free from the influence of the rebels and Homeworld. What if I declined? Naruto inquired, his palm tightening his hold on the kunai in anticipation of what he would have to do if she responded in a way that he didn't like. She gave an honest response as the house heaved and groaned harder, this time with irate cries and a few choice profanities. Then we would have hightailed it out of here and watched you from the distance in case you were with Homeworld. A buddy of yours? He pointed to the constantly shifting hulls and inquired. Spinel said, yeah, that's probably Jasper, and then she asked him a question she had been considering. Hey, do you have any more of that noodle stuff? Yes. He said, it's called ramen, and I'll make more for you as soon as we get this situation under control, and then he tapped the wooden prison around her, causing the wood to retreat back into the floor and send Spinel back down. He placed his hand on the wall and sent a mental command to the house, telling it to release the intruders into one of the many training grounds below and send him and Spinel down to meet them. The house obeyed the command, twisting and shifting as it dropped the invaders into one of the many training grounds below, and once all of the invaders were down below, a hole opened beneath Naruto and Spinel, sending them down to meet them. To ensure that he didn't unintentionally dig too deep and unleash whatever was underneath the strange temple house thing beneath the hill, Naruto used an earth jutsu to carve out small rooms in the earth, then used space-time fuinjutsu to extend the rooms on the inside while maintaining their size on the outside. Currently, there are 6 training grounds that exist beneath the lighthouse, each of which is a testament to his mastery of fuinjutsu and control over his jutsus. He also used multiple reinforcement seals to ensure that the rooms could keep up with his training while containing any noise or tremors he caused. His senses told him to move when he landed on the floor of the training ground where all the invading gems had been dumped, and he did so without hesitation. He disappeared with a body flicker and reappeared a few meters away, watching as a wave of sand crashed into his previous location. Astonished by what he had just witnessed, he turned his eyes to the source of the sands, where a single blue eye met a pair of teal eyes, one of which was slightly covered in red hair. Naruto's eye flashed with recognition as a single name came to mind, the name of a redhead and a fellow Jinchuriki like him. And that's all. I apologize for the extremely short chapter, but as I mentioned earlier, I'm working on a number of original stories for an ongoing series, and here are 2 of them for your consideration. Chapter 1 of Hella Autumn. As she hid inside the abandoned building, Hella thought to herself, in all honesty, I really shouldn't have picked up that glowing object. However, as something crashed into the building, she let out a scream that reverberated throughout the abandoned warehouse, and instead of feeling fear, she strained her ears to hear the creature's footsteps or anything else that would reveal the location of the monster that had been chasing her, all while covering her mouth with her hands to prevent any other noise from coming through. Following several minutes of total silence, Hella decided it was safe to come out of her hiding place, and as she slowly slipped away, she felt something drip on her left shoulder before it began to burn through her jacket before it reached her skin. She let out a yelp of pain and quickly removed the jacket, revealing her dark gray undershirt. She wondered what the liquid was, and then she heard a growl above her, and she realized what it was. As something crashed into her previous location, causing a spiderweb of cracks to spread across the warehouse floor, Hella threw herself to the left without even looking up, rolling across the floor away from the danger and running towards the exit without even looking at whatever was trying to kill her. She heard a roar of rage behind her, and as the distance between her and the exit grew smaller, she accelerated, a look of relief appearing on her face as thoughts of escape filled her head. However, as the monster's claws swept across her back, Hella's expression changed to one of shock, terror, and agony. Her blood was sprayed into the air, and she crashed on the floor a few feet from the door on her stomach, coughing up a mouthful of blood as the warehouse echoed with the creature's triumphant roar as she attempted to crawl towards the door. "Damn it!" As her body started to fail her, she said, "This isn't how it was supposed to be." She bled out on the concrete floor and cried, "No, not like this." She whimpered as she sensed the hungry creature's eyes on her before oblivion took her. The creature's appearance was finally revealed as it stepped into the moonlight streaming in from one of the warehouse windows. It was 2 meters tall, 7 meters long from snout to stinger, and its limbs were covered in spiked bones and a set of serrated claws protruded from its paws. Its scorpion-like tail curved above its body, the transparent venom sac above the stinger glowing with a purple hue as the liquid inside bubbled violently, and the curved serrated stinger gleamed in the moonlight. The monster saw its prey on the floor, unconscious and bleeding, and it licked its lips in anticipation as it approached her. It was so intent on getting its teeth into Hella's body that it didn't notice the newcomer at the door until it was too late. The creature, seeing that its prey was bleeding and completely unconscious, leaped towards Hella, its blood-stained claws ready to tear it to pieces and take what was inside her. The figure reached into its trench coat, pulled out a 500s Magnum revolver, and aimed at the creature as it flew towards Hella. "Well, that was anticlimactic," the figure said, blowing out the smoke that was coming from the gun barrel and pocketing the weapon in the holster strapped at the waist. Then the person walked over to Hella's bleeding and unconscious body, saying, "So this is the target?" A dim flash illuminated the dark warehouse as a bullet slammed into the monster's forehead, spraying bone fragments and brain matter everywhere. "Disappointing, but orders are orders," they told themselves before observing the slowly expanding pool of blood beneath Hella. "I already despise her," the figure uttered as their hands began to glow a gentle shade of green. As the figure squatted beside her, it put its hands on Hella's back and watched in boredom as the wounds on her back started to knit themselves together. Soon, the wounds disappeared, and 5 permanent claw marks replaced them. Upon realizing that the wounds on her back had disappeared, the figure turned Hella over and placed its hands on her now discolored shoulder, where it saw several black veins spread out from the area where the beast's saliva had touched her shoulder, and slowly moving towards her heart. As it placed its hands on her stomach and moved them in a circular motion, the figure complained before the green glow engulfed its hands once more. It watched as the black veins changed their path and moved towards the area of her body that its hands were over, creating a black spot. The figure then moved its hands upwards towards her mouth, where the black spot eagerly followed until it leaked out of her mouth as a thick black liquid. Seeing that the girl was okay, the figure walked towards the dead monster and squatted next to it. Taking out a dagger, it cut open the bottom of the beasts and began to rummage around for a while before extracting a small sack which was filled with a clear liquid. Taking out a jar from inside its trench coat, it carefully placed the sack inside and screwed the lid tight before cutting open the creature's stomach and rummaging around for something. "This one is still a baby," It hasn't yet developed, the figure thought to itself before moving on to its tail, the stinger to be exact. Carefully taking apart the tail, the figure managed to separate the venom sac and stinger from the main tail before laying it down on the floor. This won't fit in a jar, the thought ran through the person's head before they let out a sigh of frustration. Clenching right hand to form a fist, the figure aimed at the stinger and watched as the space around it distorted before the item disappeared into the ring on their hand. Snapping its fingers, it created a blue spark that engulfed the creature's body in azure flames, filling the warehouse with the stench of burning flesh. The figure watched the flames consume the creature's body until there was nothing but ash left. Standing up, the figure walked towards Hela and searched her pockets, pulling out her wallet. Going through the wallet, the person helped themselves to the 20s inside it before pulling out her library card to check her house address. After finding and memorizing it, the figure slid the card back into her pocket before carrying her out of the pool of blood and throwing her over its shoulder like a sack of potatoes. Walking out of the warehouse, the figure turned around and gave the warehouse a last glance before noticing the black puddle on the floor and Hela's blood on the floor and walls. Can't leave any evidence behind, it thought before snapping their fingers, sending an azure spark into the building, and a few seconds later the entire building was engulfed in blue flames. With barely hidden glee in its eyes, the figure watched the warehouse get consumed in flames, a grin spreading across its face as everything inside was reduced to either a molten pool or turned to ash. Absolutely beautiful. Someday the world will be beautiful like this, the figure said as they watched the warehouse burn to the ground. After what seemed like hours of staring at the smoldering pile, the figure left with Hela over its shoulder as the sound of police sirens approached. 33, 30, 29, ah, there it is, 25, the figure said as it stood outside a duplex. Gazing at the house with the lights out, its eyes wandered across the house until it came across the open attic window. I think I can throw her that far, it considered, but decided against it as the commands of its superiors echoed in its mind. It leaped towards the window, landed on the roof next to the attic window, carefully opened the window, and unceremoniously dumped Hela's body inside before running away, oblivious to the markings that appeared from her wrist to elbow and started to glow a deep purple. Pride in Saga of the Sins, Volume 1. The fire cast its warm glow on a female figure who sat on a stool close to the fireplace, watching the flames with a distant look in her eyes as she got lost in memory. Stretching out her right hand towards the fire, she watched as the fire reached out towards her outstretched hand and made its way up her arm, enveloping her in its warm embrace yet leaving her skin and clothing unhurt. She stayed seated on the stool for several minutes, her hand wreathed in flames while she was lost in her mind, and would have stayed for several more if not for the sound of trampling feet coming from outside the cottage that served as her home. Snapping back to the present at the sound of the footsteps, she dispersed the flames that covered her hand as the front door was assaulted by a flurry of knocks. "We know you're in there, Audria," a drunken voice said from outside. Anger flashed through her eyes as she identified the owner of the voice. It was Drowl, the villager that used to be her husband's best friend until she came along and married him and their child came along. He personally spearheaded all the investigations into the matter of her being a heathen, and he claimed that the potions she concocted which had healed several of their sick and were cheaper than the ones the temple sold were made from ingredients so foul that just the thought of them made her sick. There was little that his ravings could accomplish alone, but then the priests of the local temple joined him on his crusade against her, which led to a majority of her patrons and friends abandoning her. She could deal with the reduced amount of customers and income, but when the last of her friends abandoned her after the temple branded as a heretic, she began to hate him and the rest of the village. Unable to stand the villagers but unable to leave due to her husband and child, she managed to convince her husband to move to the outskirts of the village close to the forest where she could be closer to nature and her son could roam around and train with his father whenever he came back from his trips. However, they would not leave her and her family alone. Every time she went to town to get supplies, she heard the villagers and her old friends whisper things about her that made her heart hurt, and it got worse when they started to avoid her or worse, to pick on her son. Drowl had gone a step further and spread rumors that she was a heathen, that the magic she had used to heal people who had been killed in accidents came from demonic sources, and that her potions were twisted and a perversion of nature. Conveniently, they forgot that she was the one who had delivered several children in the village. Banishing the dark thoughts that came with the memories of Drowl and the villagers, she ignored his voice and took the iron poker from its resting place and began to stoke the fire, planning to ignore them until they either passed out into a drunken stupor or got tired and went home. "Get out here, you witch, we have your hellspawn here with us," the voice said, getting her attention and causing her to drop the poker. "Impossible," she thought as she got up from the stool and walked towards the door, "this has to be a trick, there should be no way he would get caught," she thought to herself, but she couldn't risk the chance of her child being in the hands of the villagers, especially if they were as drunk as Drowl sounded. Reaching the door, she let her magic flow through her and directed it to her left hand, causing it to burst into flames as she prepared to deal with the villagers in the scenario that they actually got a hold of her child. Peering through a crack in the door, she saw an assortment of men and women that formed a mob about 20 strong outside her home, all of them wrapped in fur cloaks in order to keep the winter cold out, and Drowl standing in front of them, obviously enjoying the role of leader. Standing at the back of the crowd were 3 hooded figures that watched the mob activity impassively. Drowl himself held a flaming torch in his left hand while his right rested on the hilt of his sword. Some of the villagers had their weapons drawn, while others held a variety of farming tools in their hands. One of the people behind Drowl appeared to be carrying something over his shoulder, but she couldn't see what it was because Drowl's figure blocked her view, he said as a wicked gleam appeared in his eyes before he turned towards the mob, or more specifically the person with the object on his shoulder, and nodded. The figure threw the object on the floor, revealing it to be her gagged, battered and bruised son, Ozymandias. Quenching the flames in her hand, she unbolted the door and rushed over to her son and knelt next to him, tears running down her cheeks as she took the piece of cloth that served as a gag out of his mouth before running her hands over his body, her eyes scanning his body for injuries while a light green glow emanated from her hands, healing his wounds. Once all his wounds were healed, she breathed a sigh of relief before turning towards the villagers with rage flooding through her body as both of her hands suddenly burst into yellow flames. "What did you do to him?" She first spoke a murmur before yelling, "What did you do?" The hooded individuals observed the spectacle with great fascination as blue flames suddenly erupted from her hands, forcing the snow surrounding them to melt from the heat. Several of the people in the room were startled by the flames' appearance and appeared ready to run, but the others stopped them. Too inebriated to be alarmed by Ordria's display of strength, Drowl said, "We've told you and your hellspawn to stay away from our village several times. And now we've taken the matter into our own hands. However, as you can see, we are not as callous as you witches, and we largely spared your progeny. You say that what you did to him wasn't harmful," she yelled as she prepared to throw the fire in her hands at the mob. Seeing that she was enraged, members of the mob drew their weapons. "Well, I meant relatively uninjured. After saying, I mean we even left him alive for you," Drowl added, "though that was more for your husband's sake than yours." He concluded by saying, "Take this as your final warning, you and your spawn aren't welcome here," and then he gestured for the crowd to disperse, leaving her to tend to her son. As the crowd started to depart, Drow purposefully slowed his pace in preparation for his final insult. "Oh, when Aldous returns, I want you to undo whatever spell you did to him to make him fall in love with you. Nobody could possibly fall for anything as repulsive as you, as we all know." Furious at Drow's words and deeds, Ordrea was about to attack the mob, but as she looked around, she saw that she couldn't protect her son and deal with the mob at the same time. She clenched her fists in frustration and defeat, put out the fire around her hands, and picked up her son, holding him tenderly in her arms as he gave her a hug. With her back to the crowd, she headed back to their house while her mind brainstormed ways to exact revenge on the mob, and particularly on Drow.